We want to help you be the very best missionary so that you can give your very best to the people you're serving. What makes this podcast unique is it's done by missionaries for missionaries. How can we take timeless principles and apply them to our lives as missionaries? That's really our heart behind this. Welcome to this episode of Modern Day Missionaries. I am so happy that we've got our friends Jonathan and Amanda Vining with us today. Thanks, you guys, for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is a great opportunity.
Yes, and you guys, we've gotten to know each other because fellow missionaries, and you guys have been serving in Latin America now for 6-7 years. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been over a little over 6 years, I guess. September it'll be 7, right?
Yeah.
September it'll be 7
years.
We started in Costa Rica for language school, and then from there we spent almost a year in Peru, and then for the last 5 years or so we've been here in Medellin, Colombia.
Wow. And I love your guys' story. We've had a chance to talk a little bit about what that journey has looked like, going from place to place and making shifts within that. And what's really stood out to me listening to your guys' story is obedience. I mean, that seems to be a major theme in your lives.
100%.
Yeah, I don't see any other way to live really for us at this point, because it's when you make that jump, right, to decide to be a missionary or to leave the country you were born in and go somewhere else, it's such a big decision. So you better hope that God had told you to do it, and you need to obey that calling, right? So that's kind of what we've been doing. And that's a little bit why we've moved around a bit, because the Lord tells us to do different things and we just kind of follow and obey, and he gives us the faith to do it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's something that everybody listening to would relate to. I mean, you don't end up in missions unless you get pretty good at some type of obedience. I mean, it's a pretty big yes. It's really interesting when I think about obedience. Sometimes for me, I don't know about for you guys, it can almost be easier to obey in the really big dramatic things than in the small things. Like I'll talk to people and they'll be like, whoa, how did you make that move? Or how did you do that? And somehow it can almost feel simpler. Like, God, I'll move wherever you want me to go. But then he'll ask you to do these really small steps of obedience. Like, I would like you to forgive this person. I would like you to, often it's relational, or I would like you to change up this habit.
Go up and talk to that stranger on the street. I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that guy. Did I hear you right?
Right. And you feel like I am this missionary. I should be a super obeyer. I should be amazing at all kinds of obedience. But as we talk about obedience today, there's big stuff, there's little stuff. And I think it's one of those areas where we can always keep getting better. For you guys, so when people are listening to the word obedience, sometimes it almost can have a negative connotation. We think back to when we're kids and you're like, obey your teachers, obey your parents. And as a kid, you don't necessarily love hearing that word. And then you realize the freedom that comes with it as you get older. But what has it been like for you guys to find joy in obedience?
Yeah, I think obedience, especially like stepping out and becoming missionaries, it isn't easy. Some people have, decided since they were kids, I'm going to be a missionary, and they have that joy and that preparation, right? But then I would say a lot of people, maybe most, necessarily don't grow up that way, and they get this calling out of nowhere, and you're like, okay, be a missionary. Oh, that sounds fun, right? But then you're like, oh, wait a second, I got to learn a new language. I got to leave my family. I need to raise support. I need to do all this stuff. Learn to live in a new culture, and it seems almost impossible. But I think comes with obedience, is taking those steps. It is a big leap, right? Because you're making that decision, but it's a step-by-step process, a step-by-step of praying through it and raising the support, the taking the steps to sell your stuff in the States, to get into a language school. It's a big process, but it's a step-by-step process, right? So
yeah, and I think really it's a daily thing, right? It's every day in the little things. Like, are we obeying what he says in his word? Are we doing what it says in there? Are we doing that daily? We're putting those steps in daily. It's not just one big decision. Now, listen, that's the hard part, right? Like sometimes it's the big decisions that are the hard part. I mean, I think, you always think back to Jonah, right? And not obeying God and what happened, and then what happened after that, and the blessing and all the things. And I remember, when we decided to become missionaries, and then we did all the preparation, and the Lord is like, I was really listening to the Lord. I was like, because I'm lost, right? I have no idea what I'm doing. And I was like, man, I think I might have wasted half my life not following the call of Jesus. That was a serious thing I felt, right? But it's not always that, right? It's not always, hey, you wasted half your life because you disobeyed God, right? I think it's more like, hey, we got to take these daily steps to obey what he says. And that's kind of what you have to do to even get to the big steps.
Mhm.
Absolutely. It is. It's a combination of those things. It's saying yes in the big and it's saying yes in the little. And I love that you brought up the story of Jonah. He's such a classic
Right?
example. Have you guys ever had a moment like that? Okay, let's get real here. Ever had a moment where God asked you to do something big or little, I'll let you guys decide, and you were like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he got a hold of you and you're like, fine, I will do that.
Yeah. I mean, we have gone through our own journeys. I think one particular story that comes to mind is we actually had left, we were in Peru, right? And God had kind of closed the doors in that area. And that was the mission. The mission was Peru. That was where we were supposed to be, And God he closed the doors just left and right in Peru. And so he was starting to call us to Colombia. And that was like, God, how can you close the doors in this mission that we were supposed to be in? That's where all our supporters think we're going to be. It's supposed to stay. And he started closing the doors in that area.
Yeah. And it was super hard for me, right? Because I don't adjust, it takes me a while to adjust. It's just, I'm a feet dragger kind of person. We had just set up our home in Peru. We bought everything. We had a car, we had everything we needed in Peru. And the Lord's like, nope, what you were called here to do isn't a possibility anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And almost immediately, right? He started opening up doors for Medellin.
Yeah.
Amanda got to take a trip. We met missionaries from there, and Amanda got to take a trip out there to meet them. And then I got to take a trip out there with another group to see what it would be like in Medellin. And
it was clear.
It was clear. And I was still I got back from the trip and I'm like, Lord, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Is this really something? And the doors are wide open for us. It's just Lord, I don't know. We got to find something here in Lima. There's plenty of opportunities in Lima. Why do you want us to move countries? This will be I can't do it.
And we had kids. We've got kids, and the kids had transitioned from Costa Rica doing language school. And then we went to Peru. They were in a great school and they had friends, and they were starting to adjust.
So those these things coming against what the Lord was calling us to do. And it's Lord, I don't know. I just don't know. It's not clear. It's not clear. You're going to have to be clear with me. And then I'm praying. And then one morning I'm actually in the shower talking to the Lord. Sometimes I do that, and I'm like, Lord, if this is something, and this is after all these doors have been opened, right? And I'm still not, I'm still dragging my feet. And and I'm like, Lord, if this is something you want us to do, if we're supposed to move to Medellin, I'm like, well, you're going to have to make it super clear. And he said, and I hear it and the voice is and the Lord's like, well, haven't I already made it clear? And I'm like, ooh.
Wow.
My feet. And at that point, in 3 months, we probably moved here.
Oh, it was faster than that.
Faster than that.
It was a month. And it was funny because I remember, because I was more, I'm always I would say more like apt for the adventure, and let's do this. God's calling us. Let's go. Right. And he drags his feet a little bit more. And I remember him being like, I remember him telling me, he like came out, he's like, this is what the Lord just told me. And I was like, all right, let's do this. So
You knew
Yeah.
if Jonathan said it, like this was real.
yeah,
This was happening.
I was ready, but I was waiting for him.
It's true.
Okay, I love that story because I feel like what you guys brought up happens all the time when you follow the Lord. And I've heard it in so many missionary stories where God will call you to a place or he'll send you somewhere and you go and you obey, and then it turns into something else. I mean, that's happened for us. I know in our story on multiple occasions. I know a lot of other people who've been through that too, where they're like, but Lord, you told me to go here, but now it's this. And it's really interesting just noticing how the Lord works. I think sometimes he can't show us 2 steps ahead. He knows it's a little too much for us. So he's like, I'm just going to show you 1 step ahead. And that's kind of the stepping stone to get you into where I actually want you to be. And he does things in those seasons. So it's not like that's this only a transitionary season. He does usually really deep things because those seasons, or those stepping stone seasons, are often confusing, frustrating, disorienting. And we kind of hit walls sometimes just going, Lord, what is that? And those are the times where we really dig in deep and he kind of prepares us then for what that next step is. So I know when I found out that that happens to other people too, back when it had happened to us for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, we're not the only one. Cause you do ask yourself in those seasons, like, did I hear you wrong? Cause I felt like you were really clear we were supposed to take this step and now nothing's working. Doors are closing. And God's like, just hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. I feel like a term that I've used that I think sometimes he'll give us in those seasons is holy blindness. He just can't tell us yet. He's like, you're not ready. You're not ready for what's next. So I'm just going to show you a little step and then we'll get to that next one when we get there.
Yeah, that's so true. I remember like when we were going through the process, it is like, so like he's preparing us, right? It's always preparation for the next, he takes us from glory to glory, right? So he doesn't always talk about the stuff in between. So when he's preparing you, right? He's preparing you for the next thing. He's always preparing you for the next thing. And when you get these little steps of obedience, then you're ready for the big steps to take the big steps. And I remember when we were going through this, I called my brother and, I'm like, yeah, I was like, I think the Lord's telling us to move to Medellin. I'm like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, the Lord told me that already. He's like, but I needed to let you figure that.
And Peru itself was a season of preparation. I mean, some might say, well, where was the fruit in Peru? Like, what did you do? And this and that. But like the fruit was in our family. Like we went through the fire in Peru. Like it was so difficult. We felt just alone, isolated. Our Spanish was not good. Like, and so community is so important for me. I'm an extrovert. He's an introvert. He's totally fine just hanging out at home, but I need people. Like I need people. So like, I'm trying to like build these relationships, but it's so hard when you don't, have the language down. But that season in itself was preparation for us because God took me away from people because my identity was really in relationships with people and being an extrovert and hanging out with people and all that stuff. He took that away from me so that I could completely rely on him. And it was hard. It was so hard. And I went through a season of depression in Peru and it was difficult, but I came out of that season so much stronger and my identity so much more firm in him as my best friend, as my father, and our family too. Our family just, instead of us like, praise the Lord, by his grace, he united us as a family, like our children, Jonathan and I, like our relationship, our marriage just grew so much closer together because we were all that we had, and by God's grace, as we were seeking him through the difficulties, he just united us as a family and prepared us for the next season. That wasn't something that we necessarily saw right away, but we see now.
That's what happens like when you obey, right? So that's the other side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So each season we're in really is a season simultaneously of being present where we're at, doing what we're called to do, and also preparation.
Yes.
No season is pure preparation or pure about what it is right now. It's always a both and. It's yes, what are you doing right now, God? And how is this going to prepare me for what's next? And just getting curious in those seasons and going, okay, what are you up to, Lord? What's going on here? I'm going to obey, but like, can you tell me a little bit? And he doesn't always, like you guys said, especially those really difficult obedience seasons. He often shows you later on. So you have to wait. And that's always so fun.
But the next time, right? The next time that decision comes, or the next time you face something similar, you're prepared. You're ready. You'd be like, well, this is how we handled it before. This is what God did before. So why would he not do it again?
Yeah.
You are exactly right. That is the beauty of obedience. The more you do it, the more you realize God can be trusted. And then, do you guys ever feel like life gets cyclical sometimes? Like sometimes you'll be in a season and it will remind you of a season from like a decade ago. And you're like, haven't I done something like this before? It's interesting with life. And then I'm like, how did we handle this last time? And how could we handle it better this time?
Absolutely.
Happens all the time.
All the time.
Especially the older you get, you're like, deja vu. Yeah. But not everybody grows in those deja vu seasons. I mean, sometimes
Yeah. No,
you don't learn
right.
to obey. Just do it all over again. Just keep messing up and messing up and messing up. But if you can learn to follow God, man, it's like, all right, I'm going to trust you again. Let's do this, Lord. It's not comfortable. I don't like it, but I know what to do.
So that reminds me. So then we get to Columbia, right? And so I'm guessing everybody thinks that it was, roses and daisies, right? No. We got to Columbia.
It was amazing, right?
We got to Columbia. We started partnering with other missionaries in a foundation for children. And literally, like, when we arrived a month later, they decided that they were going to kind of separate and start their own foundation, and which was separate, kind of like separate from this church that had a foundation. So a church had a foundation when they were partnering with them, but they want to start their own thing. And we were like, oh, this sounds so exciting. What's going to happen? It ended up being a huge mess. It was a mess. And the long story short is that God called Jonathan and I to two different things. He called Jonathan to go work with this couple in their foundation. He called me to stay in the other foundation and kind of walk through with the employees just the challenges through the transition and all that. And that's where he was calling me. And I was like, okay, God, this is a little strange, but I'm going to do it, because I feel like this is what you're calling me to. And in the end, they asked me to leave that foundation because there was, I don't know how you would explain it, almost like conflict of interest. I don't really know. But the long story short is God called me to this foundation and then I was forced to leave. And I was like, God, what is going on? And there was so much.
But I heard you correctly. Like, you wanted me to stay. Why am I leaving?
Yeah. And it was another season of grief. And I just had gotten out of a season of grief. And I'm just like, God, what are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to teach us through this? And
but I think
he always is teaching us something. I was supposed to be there. I was supposed to walk them through this transition. Even though I was then, I had to leave, that time that I was there was so beneficial for them because for them to see that there was a stable person in there. And I would just like, my ministry in that moment was just I would make cookies for them. I would pray for them. Like these employees that were going through a very difficult transition. And we would go out and just like, I would just love on them. I was just loving on these employees. And that was that season, right? And then that season was over. And I think a lot of obedience comes with you not holding on so tightly to the things or to the moments, to the ministries, to the churches so tightly because you love them so much, but just, you have to keep your hands almost like, half open. Like I am here, and this is where I'm supposed to be, but you're always leaving room for God to enter and, decide what he wants you to do. And so I think that's a lot of missions in general.
Well, so let me ask a question out of her.
Go for it.
So the second time now that you have now gone through like loss and transition,
Mhm.
how did it go compared to the first time?
It wasn't as hard. I mean, it was still difficult, but it wasn't as difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that right away.
Mhm.
Like when we were going through it, I'm like, well, we kind of been through this before, and the Lord was faithful, so
Yeah. Yeah.
He's got plans.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's kind of like when you've been through grief multiple times. Each time it hurts because you're losing a different person,
Right.
but you at least understand the process of grieving. So it
Mhm.
doesn't mean, let's say that you're in ministry and you get backstabbed by somebody, because let's be real, that happens a lot. It still hurts every single time. But after a few times, if you don't let yourself get jaded and you still stay sensitive, you're like, all right, this hurts, but I get what's happening. And Lord, I believe that you will heal my heart in this way. And
Mhm.
so when we've gone through it multiple times, yeah, we're like, all right, Lord, I think I understand a little bit of the steps that I should take. And we just keep learning and we just keep getting better. And I love one of the things that you were saying, Amanda. It made me think, um, the fruit of obedience is not always outward success.
Mhm.
There is this, I think, this lie we tell ourselves sometimes, because if we see it on paper, we would know it's not true. But I think deep inside us, we feel like if I obey the Lord, it's going to lead to success because he's asking me to do this. How could it lead to anything else?
Mhm.
And we define success. We've talked about this on the podcast before. We define success sometimes by how the world views it. So we can take these steps of obedience and then feel like this entitlement, like, Lord, I did what you asked me to do. Why am I not seeing fruit? Because again, what kind of fruit are we looking for? But to your point, God was absolutely producing fruit, but it was internally in preparation for what was next.
I
Mhm.
mean, it was successful. You know, you
Yes.
okay, it's going to be successful, but it's not always the way that you think it's going to be successful.
Mhm.
A lot of times it doesn't always pan out the way you want. Usually it's because there's something inside of you that has changed, that needs to change, or that the Lord needs to root out, or something like that, so that you can move forward.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Saying yes to him and letting him figure out what the results are going to be.
And the perseverance through the obedience. And I think that that's the longevity in missions, to be honest, is persevering through the challenges of being obedient. It's not a fast thing. I mean, in our experience, it's never fast. you know, the
No,
obedience
we'll
is
just rip the band-aid off. It'll be fine tomorrow.
no. It's always months and months and months of being in a ministry, and then maybe it changes, and then you have to transition to another ministry, and it's difficult and all those things. And it's persevering through the challenges of obedience is, for me, I think is very important in missions. And it's what helps keep you on stable ground as a missionary.
You are absolutely right. I think sometimes we think of obedience like a checklist and we say yes and we feel like it should be this one thing. But every step of obedience, especially some of these big ones, it includes 1,000 other tiny
Hmm.
acts of obedience that come along with it. So, yes, we're going to move to Medellin. Because we said yes to Medellin, we're saying yes to this and 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 this. And it's constant, it's never ending. So it's a process. You get to live on out and keep trusting God in all the moments, and the perseverance is so huge because how many people have said yes to God in big ways, and then when they didn't start seeing the success or they didn't start seeing what they thought they were going to see, they're like, "Peace out, I'm done. I must have heard God wrong, or I'm angry because this is not what I thought." So I think so many times, even more than being about those big ones, it's about those little ones. So for you guys thinking about those small steps of obedience, what are some of the hardest things God has asked or sometimes still is asking you guys to do?
And one of the most challenging things for us, well, for me, was during the pandemic. We were here in Colombia, and I mean, you guys were in Peru, right? Like in
Yeah.
Latin America, we were forced to stay inside our house. Our kids couldn't go out and play in the grass. Like, and we don't have a backyard. Like, we don't have anything like that. So the kids were literally in the house all the time. And I mean, social media has its perks and its downfalls. But when you're a missionary in a Latin American country and you're looking at your friends in the States and their kids are outside playing, I mean, to be honest, I was like, we got to get out of here. We got to go back to the
Yeah.
States. Like, because at least our kids can go outside, and ministry wise, the foundations were closed down. And at that time, God had transitioned to us to
It's like the process. We're in the middle
the
of
process of working more full time with the church. And so we ended up staying. We did not feel like God was telling us to go back to the States. We felt like he was saying, be obedient and stay. And that was really a challenge. It was a challenge, with the kids. It was a challenge because we were watching, I would say, most of our missionary friends in other countries go back to the States. And we were like, oh no, like we're still here. Are we supposed to go back? Like,
Some of them had choices to
Yeah.
go back. Some of them didn't have choices. Some of the missions agencies were like, you need to get
It's-
back here, because nobody knew what was going on at the time.
it was such an
Right.
unknown thing, right? And so
We just felt the Lord say, no, stay. And we're like, okay.
what happened was our pastor, he came to us and he said, I want to start feeding people. There's starving people everywhere. A lot of people, I would say most people in Latin American countries, like what they make for that day is what they feed their families with for that day. There's so much poverty and people couldn't even beg in the streets. Like it just was, so
Well, they weren't allowed to work.
They
Like
weren't allowed
people
to
weren't
work,
allowed to
yeah.
leave the house. And, there's more, in Latin America, there's more there's more jobs where you actually have to leave your house.
Right.
You can't just work from home. A lot of people just couldn't do
Right.
that.
at that time. And so he said, I want to start feeding people. And God just he put on my heart to really just kind of reach out to donors, reach out to people. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. We might just get a few dollars, but it's whatever. I'm just going to put it out there. But God was super clear. Like, let's reach out to people, to donors in the States and see what happens. And the response, I actually have goosebumps thinking about it, was crazy. Like I just put, I think it was $10 a day, feeds a family for a week, and feeds a family for a week. And I just put it out there, like in social media and like in our newsletters, and people shared it and shared it and shared it and shared it. And I was just like, it was such a cool thing because God was like, he told me what to do. We were obedient. We stayed in Colombia. And I also,
But it was hard.
But
It's like, I want to go live and stay at my parents' house. They got a huge backyard. You're allowed to actually leave your house in the United States. And, you don't have helicopters flying around telling you to stay inside,
Right? People don't realize that's what it was in Latin America. Helicopters and bullhorns.
Like,
Oh, leave your house.
What's going to happen if I leave those things?
we're like, what?
Is that the helicopter screaming things at me?
Wasn't that surreal? That was such a surreal experience for anybody listening in Latin America who went through that. Yeah, that was.
Wow. And that's it. Like, that was the hard, it was the hard thing to do was to stay here. I mean,
But-
could have gone back,
But the fruit was nuts. Like the fruit of it. We had probably $20,000 come in for this feeding. We ended up feeding how many?
thousands and
Thousands
like,
and thousands of families.
thousands of families.
It was incredible. And that was because we stayed, and we were there buying food in the grocery stores with our masks and this and that. We were part of that. And we were able to hand out food to some families and this and that. And it just was so cool because so many families came to Christ just through the physical element of food, right? They were so needing, they were so hungry. It was just such an amazing tool, evangelistic tool, right?
That is awesome. And I love that you brought up a really big one and a really little one that kind of went together. The big one was stay, which stay doesn't sound like a big step of obedience, but for those of us in there, there at that time, that was a huge step of obedience. Stay was huge. And then this little one, like, hey, do a post on social media. All right, I'll throw it up there and see what happens. And the combination of those two produced something you guys had never even seen happen before.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for coming on to share. I'm hoping that as people are listening, it's causing them to just think, all right, God, what are some of the ways in which you're calling me to take some risks and do some really big things? And then what are the ways that I can be faithful where I'm at and to keep obeying in areas where I want to give up on, or where I'm feeling like Jonah, or where I'm wanting to reinterpret what God says. That's one of my other favorites. When God gives you a direction and you pull like a King Saul and you're like, I know you told me 7 days I should wait to do do an offering, but I really feel like now is a good time. So I'm not going to wait for Samuel. So I'm going to do that now because I feel like I just want to honor you, God. We'll use all of these reasons to justify sometimes why we
Thing
want to
I'm doing.
disobey.
I mean, I'm sacrificing stuff for you. It's not like it's a bad thing.
Totally. And we'll do that sometimes. We'll take these instruction that God gives us. And because we don't quite like it and we feel like we maybe have a better way of doing it, we'll like sort of obey. And he's like, you missed the point entirely. There's so many little things like that in our life. And so this is even just causing me to think, and I'm hoping with everybody else, it's causing them to think, Lord, what is one way that I can step into obedience with you today? And maybe it is something big, like we said, and maybe it's something small. Sometimes those small ones are the ones that can really open up huge things in our life. So I loved your guys' stories. Thank you so much for sharing those and sharing a little bit of inspiration with everybody today. As always, it is so fun to hang out with the both of you.
Yeah, we love hanging out with you. It's so much fun. We laugh a lot.
Always, always. We said we should have recorded the part before we started recording. It was
Takes an hour
it
to let
was
it keep.
yes, it was nonsense and hilarious, and I loved it. So if people want to get a hold of you guys and get to know you guys, Jonathan and Amanda are modern day missionaries. So you can pop right on modernday.org and you can find them right there to find out more about what they are doing with their work in Medellin. So thanks for joining us today on this episode, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.